My name is Natalie. I am 33 years old, and I stood in the foyer of my $2.5 million Beacon Hill Brownstone, staring at my father and stepmother as they barged through my front door with a team of movers. They smirked and told me to pack my bags because the house belonged to them now. They tried to evict me from the very home my late grandmother left me, waving a forged document in my face. What they forgot was that I am a senior partner in real estate litigation. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to take everything you worked for. It was a quiet Saturday morning in Boston. 3 months had passed since my beloved grandmother, Clara, passed away. I was sitting in the historic parlor, sipping my black coffee and looking at the antique grandfather clock she loved so much. I was trying to find some peace in the memories we shared in this beautiful home. Then, the heavy aggressive pounding on my front door started. It was not a polite knock from a neighbor. It was the loud, demanding sound of someone who believed they owned the place. I set my coffee cup down, walked down the hallway, and pulled the heavy oak door open. I found my father, Richard, standing on my porch. He is 62 years old, but his face carried the exact same arrogant scowl I remembered from my painful childhood. Standing right next to him was my stepmother, Brenda. She is 55 years old and was dressed in a ridiculous designer tracksuit that she clearly thought made her look wealthy and important. Right behind them stood my 28-year-old half-sister Brittany. She was holding her phone high in the air, already recording everything for her social media followers. Beside her was her husband, Jamal. Jamal is 31, an African-American tech bro, who constantly brags about his startup companies that never actually seem to generate any real profit. But the real shock was not just my arranged family showing up completely uninvited. It was the 4 burly movers standing right behind them, carrying 10 heavy cardboard boxes packed with their personal belongings. Before I could even ask what was going on, Brenda pushed her way right past me. She stepped directly into my foyer, looking around the elegant space with a sneer of absolute disgust on her face. "You need to pack your cheap bags and get out," Brenda announced, her voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. "This is your father's house now." I stood there frozen, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of her words. Brittany shoved past me next, not even bothering to lower her phone. She was live streaming to her followers, loudly complaining about the vintage wallpaper and saying the place needed a complete modern makeover. Jamal walked in right after her. He did not even look at me or say hello. Instead, he pulled a digital laser measuring tape out of his pocket and began pointing it at the walls of my historic parlor. The little red dot danced across the original 19th century mahogany panels that my grandmother had spent decades meticulously preserving. "This space is decent," Jamal said loudly to Brittany, completely ignoring my presence. "If we gut these old panels and tear down that stone fireplace, we can build you a state-of-the-art podcast studio right here in the center of the room. It will have perfect acoustics once we rip out this outdated hardwood flooring." I watched him casually plot the complete destruction of my grandmother Clara's most cherished room. The disrespect was absolutely suffocating. I finally found my voice, pushing past the initial shock. "What are you doing in my house?" I demanded, stepping firmly between Jamal and the fireplace. "You need to tell these movers to leave my property right now." My father Richard scoffed loudly. He slowly walked inside, looking at me like I was a stubborn tenant who was refusing to pay rent. He reached inside his expensive, tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He threw it casually onto the antique entryway table. It landed with a soft slap against the polished wood. "You do not own anything here, Natalie," he said, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "Read it and weep. Your grandmother finally came to her senses before she died and gave the property to the rightful head of the family." I looked down at the crumpled paper on the table. Across the top, printed in bold black letters, were the words "Quit Claim Deed." It alleged that Clara had transferred the entire property to Richard just weeks before her passing. I picked up the document. My hands were perfectly steady. I spent my days analyzing complex property disputes, untangling corporate fraud, and destroying forged contracts in federal court. I did not panic. I simply read the paper in front of me. My father stood there crossing his arms, fully expecting me to break down, crying. Brenda was smirking from the kitchen doorway, clearly enjoying what she thought was the ultimate victory over the stepdaughter she had always deeply hated. Jamal was still measuring the walls, acting like the eviction was already finalized. Brittany was posing for her camera, narrating her triumph to strangers online. But as my eyes scanned the page, my highly trained legal mind immediately went to work, breaking down their pathetic attempt at theft. Piece by piece, preparing for war. I knew exactly how to handle this totally insane and ridiculous situation with absolute precision. Every detail on that forged paper was a glaring mistake. I took a slow breath and decided to let them think they had actually won. This would be the biggest mistake of their lives. I held the piece of paper in my hands, keeping my face entirely blank. On the surface, I looked like a woman whose entire world was collapsing, but inside my head, my mind shifted into a sharp, cold, and highly analytical focus. I am a senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in Boston, and my specific area of expertise happens to be real estate litigation. I spend my days tearing apart fraudulent contracts and exposing property scams in federal court. It took me exactly 3 seconds to spot the glaring errors on the document they had so confidently thrown onto my entryway table. First of all, the signature was a complete joke. My grandmother Clara had a very distinct, elegant way of writing her name. The loop on the capital C in her signature always swooped downward in a specific sharp angle. The signature on this quitclaim deed was clumsy, shaky, and the C was completely rounded. It looked like someone had tried to trace it from an old birthday card. Secondly, the notary stamp pressed onto the bottom right corner of the page was completely invalid. The expiration date on the notary seal was from 2 years ago, in the state of Massachusetts. An expired notary stamp renders a property transfer document completely legally void upon arrival. Finally, the formatting of the legal description was entirely wrong for a historic Beacon Hill property. It lacked the necessary lot boundaries and registry book references that any first-year law student would know to include. It was a pathetic, amateurish forgery. My stepmother, Brenda, likely found a template online, printed it out, and had Richard forge the signature, while assuming I would be too stupid to notice. For a split second, I considered pulling out my phone and calling the Boston police right then and there. I could easily have them arrested for trespassing and escorted off my property in handcuffs. But the analytical side of my brain immediately stopped me. If I called the police right now, it would just be a simple trespassing dispute. They would be forced to leave, but they would probably just get a slap on the wrist. They would claim it was a family misunderstanding. I did not want a simple misunderstanding. I wanted them completely destroyed. I wanted them to face federal consequences for what they were trying to do to my grandmother Clara and her legacy. To catch a rat, you have to leave the cheese on the trap. So, I decided to play along. I let my shoulders slump forward, deliberately dropping my posture to make myself look small and defeated. I forced my hands to shake slightly as I placed the forged deed back onto the mahogany table. I looked up at my father with wide, devastated eyes, playing the exact role of the submissive, broken daughter that he always wanted me to be. "You cannot be serious," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "Grandma Clara promised this house to me. She told me it was mine." Richard laughed, a harsh and booming sound that filled the foyer. "People say a lot of things before they die, Natalie." He sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. "But the ink on this paper is what matters." She realized that leaving a multi-million-dollar estate to a single, lonely woman who cares more about legal briefs than starting a family was a massive waste of resources. "This house belongs to the head of the family now." Brittany shoved her phone camera closer to my face, capturing my fake devastation for her live stream. "See, guys," Brittany announced to her followers with a cruel giggle. "This is what happens when you are selfish your whole life. You end up with absolutely nothing." Jamal did not even look up from his laser measuring tape. He was already shouting dimensions to Brittany, talking about knocking down load-bearing walls, as if I was already gone. Brenda stepped closer to me, her heavy perfume making me want to gag. She crossed her arms and looked me up and down with pure disdain. "You have exactly 20 minutes to pack your cheap clothes and get out of our house," she commanded. "Do not try to take any of the antique furniture or the silver. It all belongs to us now. If you are not out of here in 20 minutes, I will have Jamal physically throw you out onto the street." I let out a fake sob, nodding submissively. "Okay," I whispered, keeping my head down. "I will pack my things. Please, just give me a minute." I turned around and walked up the grand staircase, letting them hear my dramatic sniffles. As soon as I reached the second-floor landing and was out of their sight, my tears vanished completely. My face hardened into a mask of pure determination. I walked into my master bedroom and pulled a small leather overnight bag from the closet. I did not pack much. I threw in a few changes of clothes and some basic toiletries. The only things I truly cared about were my work laptop, my secure encrypted hard drives, and the heavy fireproof lockbox hidden in the back of my closet. That lockbox contained the true original certified documents regarding the house documents that proved their quitclaim deed was not just a fake, but an absolute legal impossibility. I zipped my bag shut and walked back downstairs. My father was pouring himself bourbon from the antique crystal decanter. Jamal and Brittany were taking selfies nearby. May Brenda complained loudly that the crown molding looked old. I walked silently to the front door. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob, looking back at them, celebrating. They were completely unaware that the entire house was equipped with hidden smart home surveillance cameras linked directly to my phone. I smiled, knowing they had just walked directly into my carefully laid trap. I pulled the heavy front door shut behind me, the sharp click of the lock echoing in the crisp Boston air. Stepping down the stone stairs, I did not look back. I walked directly to my car, placed my leather overnight bag on the passenger seat, and drove away from Beacon Hill. The drive was short, but it gave me the exact amount of time I needed to completely compartmentalize the anger burning in my chest. I checked into a luxury hotel downtown, securing a corner suite that would serve as my temporary command center for the next few days. As soon as the bellhop left my room, I locked the door, took off my coat, and sat at the large mahogany desk. I opened my laptop and immediately synced it to my phone. With a few quick keystrokes, the high-definition security feeds from my house filled the large screen. I had installed these discrete cameras months ago for security purposes after some packages went missing in the neighborhood. Placing them in the foyer, the historic parlor, the kitchen, and the main hallways, they were practically invisible, disguised as smoke detectors, and integrated into the smart home system. They were broadcasting a crystal-clearer live feed of my family, staging their hostile takeover. I watched the screen intently. In the parlor, Brittany was holding a massive bottle of expensive champagne, laughing loudly as she popped the cork. The foam sprayed all over the antique Persian rug my grandmother had brought back from her travels. Seeing Brittany act so entitled in my home triggered a very specific and painful memory. When I was 18 years old, my father had physically thrown all my belongings into the hallway to kick me out of my childhood bedroom, so Brittany could have a massive walk-in closet. He had coldly told me that it did not matter, because I only cared about boring books anyway, while my sister needed the space to prepare for her important social life. I pushed that bitter memory aside and focused on the present reality. Their celebration was entirely premature. They believed they had outsmarted me, but they had absolutely no idea how the law actually worked. I opened a new secure tab on my browser and logged directly into my law firm encrypted database. As a senior partner, I have high-level clearance and direct access to the county registry of deeds and the state property tracking systems. I needed to ensure that Richard and Jamal could not do any immediate financial damage using that forged piece of paper. They might try to sell the property quickly to an unsuspecting cash buyer, or they might try to use it as collateral. I was not going to let them profit from my grandmother legacy for even a single second. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I rapidly drafted an emergency injunction. This specific legal maneuver is a powerful tool in real estate litigation. It places a hard silent freeze on the property title. I attached my certified proof of identity and my sworn affidavit as the property rightful owner. I routed the emergency filing directly through the automated electronic court system, flagging it for immediate judicial review based on suspected fraudulent conveyance. Because it was a weekend, the full judicial review would be processed first thing on Monday morning, but the preliminary electronic hold took effect instantly. A digital lock was now firmly placed on the deed. If Jamal or Richard tried to run that forged document through any legitimate title company or real estate agency, red flags would instantly pop up across the entire banking system. The beauty of this specific injunction was its complete silence. The state does not send an automatic email or a warning letter to the people attempting the fraud. Richard and his crew would have absolutely no idea the property was frozen until they actually tried to execute a legal transaction. They were effectively trapped inside a financial cage of their own making, and I was holding the only key. I leaned back in my ergonomic hotel chair and took a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly leave my shoulders. I watched the live camera feed again. Jamal was now in the kitchen, aggressively opening cabinets and complaining about the vintage hardware. Brenda was walking through the hallway, pointing at my grandmother's classic oil paintings and making throwing motions with her hands, clearly planning to discard them. My father was sitting in my favorite leather armchair, drinking my expensive bourbon, looking incredibly smug and satisfied with himself. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally put the boring bookish daughter in her proper place. What they failed to realize was that real estate fraud is a highly complex web. And by physically occupying the property with a forged document, they were establishing a documented timeline of criminal intent. Every step they took inside my house, every wall they measured, every conversation they had about the property was currently being recorded by my smart home system and uploaded to a secure cloud server. I did not just want to kick them out. If I simply proved the deed was fake today, they would just claim they were victims of a bad notary and walk away without any real consequences. They would go back to their comfortable lives and try to find another sneaky way to completely ruin mine. I needed them to commit fully to the crime. I needed them to take an action so legally damning that they could never escape the severe consequences. I poured myself a glass of cold water, keeping my eyes fixed on the glowing monitor. I was fully prepared to watch them like a hawk. I was entirely prepared to let them dig their own graves, shovel by shovel, until the hole was far too deep for them to ever climb out. This was just the very beginning of their absolute and total destruction. I sat in the complete silence of my hotel room, highly focused and ready for the incoming legal battle that would permanently change all of their lives forever. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of my hotel suite, waking me from a surprisingly restful sleep. I ordered black coffee from room service and immediately opened my laptop to check the overnight surveillance feeds. The house was quiet, but my phone suddenly buzzed on the nightstand. It was a social media notification. Brittany had just gone live on Instagram to her 200,000 followers. I mirrored my phone to my laptop screen and hit the screen record button, ensuring I captured every single second of her broadcast. Brittany was standing in the center of my grand foyer, wearing a designer silk robe and holding a steaming mug of expensive matcha. "Welcome to our new multi-million-dollar Boston home, you guys," she announced, flashing a brilliant artificial smile at the camera. Jamal and I are absolutely thrilled to finally move into this gorgeous, historic brownstone in Beacon Hill. It has been such a massive transition, but we are so blessed to take over this estate. She flipped the camera around to show off the grand mahogany staircase and the intricate crystal chandelier hanging from the vated ceiling. I watched in cold silence as she paraded through the rooms my grandmother had so lovingly maintained for decades. Brittany strutted into the historic parlor, pointing her manicured finger at the antique fireplace. "We are totally gutting this entire room," she told her followers. "It is super outdated and way too stuffy. We are building a high-tech studio space right here." Jamal has huge plans for his startup, and we need an environment that matches our modern, visionary lifestyle. Agree. The live chat was scrolling rapidly with her followers sending heart emojis and asking how she managed to secure such an incredible property at her young age. Brittany paused, leaning against the doorframe with a look of practiced fake sympathy. Well, honestly, you guys, it is a bit of a sad family situation, she sighed, lowering her voice to sound dramatic. My older sister was living here before us, but she is 33 and completely single. She just could not afford to keep the place or manage the massive upkeep by herself. I gripped my coffee cup tightly as I listened to her spin this ridiculous web of lies to thousands of strangers. It is honestly so sad when bitter single women try to take on too much and just fail. The Brittany continued, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive poison. We had to step in and take over the property to save it from going into total ruin. It was a tough decision, but sometimes family has to do the hard things to fix someone else's huge mistakes. Plus, a grand estate like this really needs a strong man to manage the heavy lifting. I stopped the screen recording and safely backed up the video file to my secure cloud server. Brittany had just handed me a golden piece of evidence. She had publicly broadcasted her illegal occupation of my property, openly admitted to planning unpermitted demolitions on a historically protected interior, and explicitly defamed my financial standing to hundreds of thousands of people. In the legal world, we call this a highly lucrative defamation and property damage slam dunk. Just as I was cataloging the video file, my phone vibrated aggressively across the desk. It was a barrage of text messages from the family group chat. I opened the application and saw a long block of text from my father, Richard. He was clearly feeling incredibly bold and victorious after successfully kicking me out of the house the night before. His message was a masterclass in toxic gaslighting and patriarchal manipulation. Learn to accept reality, Natalie. He wrote, you are a single woman who works entirely too much. You have dedicated your whole life to chasing corporate promotions, and look where it got you. You are completely alone. Women with advanced degrees always end up alone because they forget how to be proper family members. You should be down on your knees thanking us. You should be happy your sister has a real man like Jamal to take care of this massive estate because you clearly could not handle the pressure. Before I could process the sheer audacity of his text, Brenda chimed in with her own message. Your father is completely right, sweetheart, she typed, adding a praying hands emoji. We know you are probably feeling very jealous of your sister right now, but holding on to that bitter resentment is just toxic. Let the men handle the business and the assets. You should focus on finding a husband before your biological clock runs out completely. We are doing you a massive favor by lifting this heavy real estate burden off your shoulders. I sat in my hotel chair staring at the glowing screen. Their absolute delusion was almost fascinating to witness. They truly believed that because I was an unmarried woman without children, I was completely incapable of managing a valuable asset. They thought my law degree was just a cute little hobby, and that Jamal, a man drowning in secret financial debt, was somehow safer simply because he was a man. I placed my fingers on the keyboard, knowing exactly how to play this psychological game. If I argued with them, they would just call me hysterical and defensive. If I threatened them, they might get spooked and try to cover their tracks before the federal crime was fully executed. I needed to feed their massive egos to keep them comfortable in their stolen castle. I understand, Dad, I typed, keeping my response short and submissive. I am just feeling very overwhelmed right now. I need some time alone to process everything that happened. Richard replied very quickly. That is a good girl. Take days to calm your emotions. We will talk about letting you pick up the rest of your cheap clothes next week. I locked my screen. They were the prey now. I set my phone down and turned my full attention back to the high-definition surveillance feed on my laptop screen. The morning sunlight was streaming through the large bay windows of the parlor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Jamal and Brittany had temporarily left the room, leaving my stepmother, Brenda, alone with my grandmother Clara's most prized possessions. Brenda was pacing back and forth across the authentic 19th-century Persian rug, holding her cell phone tightly to her ear. I reached out and turned up the volume on my computer speakers, isolating the audio feed from the hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector directly above her head. Brenda sounded incredibly eager and highly secretive. "Yes, I need someone to come out here immediately," Brenda was saying into the phone, her voice a harsh whisper. "We just took possession of this massive estate in Beacon Hill, and it is completely full of outdated junk. We are doing a full modern renovation, and I need all of this old antique furniture cleared out today. I am talking about solid mahogany dining sets, original oil paintings, and a massive grandfather clock. I will take cash right now if you can bring a truck before noon." My blood ran ice cold as I listened to her casually trying to pawn off generations of my family history for quick spending money. My grandmother Clara had spent her entire life meticulously curating that collection. The grandfather clock alone was a rare antique imported from Europe over a century ago, worth more than Brenda had ever earned in her entire life. The oil paintings hanging on the walls were original pieces by renowned local artists. They were not just valuable assets. They were irreplaceable family heirlooms holding deep emotional significance. Brenda was treating them like garbage from a yard sale, simply because she wanted some fast cash to fund her shopping habits. I watched her walk over to a solid silver tea set resting on the credenza, picking up a heavy teapot and examining the hallmark on the bottom. She smiled greedily, clearly calculating how many designer handbags she could buy with the melted-down silver. I heard the dealer on the other end of the phone agree to send an appraisal team to the brownstone at 2:00 that afternoon. Brenda hung up the phone, doing a ridiculous little victory dance in the middle of my parlor. I had to stop that sale immediately, but my legal mind quickly calculated the massive risks of interfering directly. If I drove over there right now and physically blocked the antique dealers from taking the furniture, I would blow my cover entirely. Richard and Brenda would instantly realize I was actively monitoring the property. They might panic and destroy the forged quitclaim deed before I could officially pin the federal charges on them. If I called the police to report a theft, the authorities would just look at Richard's forged deed and declare it a civil dispute over inheritance. I could not risk showing my hand too early. I needed a distraction. I needed to stall Brenda just long enough to let the federal financial crimes fully materialize. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my elite network of professional contacts. I stopped on the name Harrison. Harrison was a junior partner at my law firm, known for his ruthless negotiation skills and his incredible ability to think on his feet. I called Harrison, and he answered on the second ring. I quickly explained the entire situation, giving him the exact address of the brownstone and a detailed description of the specific antique pieces Brenda was trying to liquidate. "I need you to play a role," I told him, keeping my voice steady and commanding. "I need you to pose as an exclusive, high-end art dealer and private collector from Manhattan. You represent anonymous billionaire buyers who specialize in 19th century Boston antiquities. You need to contact Brenda before the local pawn shop guys show up, and you need to appeal directly to her bottomless greed." Harrison chuckled softly, understanding the assignment perfectly. "Consider it done, Natalie," he said. "I will make her an offer she is far too greedy to refuse." We hung up, and I immediately went back to monitoring the live audio and video feeds from the parlor. I watched Brenda instructing the movers to start hauling the heavy, mahogany chairs toward the front door to prepare for the local dealer arrival. She was barking orders like a tyrant, completely oblivious to the trap I was currently setting. 10 minutes later, Brenda's cell phone rang. I watched her glance at the caller identification, looking confused by the out-of-state New York number before answering. "Hello?" Brenda asked. Over the hidden camera audio feed, I could hear Harrison's smooth, professional, and incredibly persuasive voice. "Good morning," he said, adopting a perfectly arrogant tone. "Am I speaking with the new owner of the Beacon Hill estate?" I was informed by a confidential source in the local historical society that you might be liquidating some significant 19th century assets. Brenda's posture instantly changed. She stood up straighter, suddenly trying to sound sophisticated and wealthy. "Yes, I am the lady of the house, she replied, putting on a fake transatlantic accent. Who exactly is calling? Harrison introduced himself as a premier acquisitions director for a private syndicate of global billionaires. He told Brenda that his clients were highly interested in the specific grandfather clock and the original oil paintings currently residing in her parlor. He casually mentioned that local dealers would completely rip her off, offering mere pennies on the dollar for items that his elite clients would gladly pay absolute top-tier premium market value for. Brenda's eyes widened with sheer greed. She immediately canceled the local pickup, securing the priceless heirlooms and buying me the precious time I needed to lock my federal trap today. I watched Brenda cancel the local pickup through my laptop screen, knowing her greed had just bought me the exact time I needed. I leaned back and took a deep breath, but before I could even process my small victory, my cell phone vibrated violently against the desk. The caller identification displayed a name that made my blood boil. It was Jamal. Jamal was calling me just hours after throwing me out of my own home. He wanted to gloat and rub his supposed victory right in my face. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I quickly opened a secure recording application on my phone. As a lawyer dealing with high-stakes fraud, I always maintain the tools necessary to document criminal admissions. I pressed the red record button and then swiped to accept the call, putting him on speakerphone. "Hello," I answered, keeping my voice deliberately soft and unsteady, as if I had been crying all morning. Jamal let out a very loud, arrogant laugh. "Well, if it is not the former lady of the house," he said, his tone dripping with intense condescension, "I just wanted to call and make sure you found a nice little apartment to rent. Something small where you can stack your boring legal paperwork." I gritted my teeth, my fingers clenching into fists, but I maintained my submissive act. "I am at a hotel," I murmured, sounding entirely defeated. "It is very overwhelming, Jamal. I just do not understand how this happened so fast." That is exactly the opening he was looking for. Jamal loves nothing more than hearing himself talk, especially when he thinks he is sounding like a brilliant entrepreneur. "Listen closely, Natalie, because I will explain how the real world operates," he said, adopting the tone of a teacher. He then proceeded to completely mansplain basic property law to a senior partner in real estate litigation. It took every ounce of my professional control not to laugh at his ignorance. When property transfers happen within a family, it is about whoever takes physical initiative. Jamal continued spouting legal nonsense. "Your father and I recognize that this historic brownstone was completely wasted on a single woman. An asset of this magnitude requires aggressive capitalization. My new tech startup needs a premium headquarters to secure our next round of venture capital funding. The parlor we are gutting today is going to be our main executive pitching room." I forced a pathetic-sounding sniffle into the phone receiver. "But the house means so much to me," I whispered. "Grandma Clara wanted me to have it. I just do not understand how the legal system could let you take it from me with that single piece of paper." Jamal scoffed loudly, his ego inflating with every word. "Law is written by the winners, Nat," he said, quoting the exact arrogant phrase I knew he would use. "You are just a low-level paper pusher. Let the real businessman handle the assets. We understand how to leverage real estate to build a corporate empire. You just sit at a desk and review zoning permits all day." I bit my tongue incredibly hard. I needed him to keep talking. I needed him to feel so invincible and unchallenged that he would freely admit to the criminal methods they used to acquire the property. But Jamal," I asked, pitching my voice an octave higher to sound incredibly naive and confused. I looked at that quitclaim deed before I left. I simply noticed the notary stamp had an expired date on it, and Grandma's signature looked a little bit different. "Does the bank not check those kinds of things when you file the paperwork?" Jamal laughed again, completely falling right into my carefully laid trap. "Oh, Natalie, you are so incredibly naive about how high-level finance works," he boasted. "Banks do not look at minor clerical errors when you bring them a property worth over $2 million. Your father and I simply found a standard template online. We printed it out and handled the signatures ourselves to speed up the process. Your grandmother was already gone, So we just took care of the administrative bottleneck. We expedited the transfer, because time is money in the startup world. Nobody is going to scrutinize an expired stamp when the head of the family is the one presenting the paperwork. My heart hammered in my chest, but my face remained an absolute mask of cold calculation. He had just openly admitted to forging a legal document on a recorded line. He had explicitly confirmed that he and my father bypassed legal authentication to manufacture a fake deed. But I needed one more piece of the puzzle to secure a federal conviction. I needed to know exactly what they were doing with that forged deed right now. I am so scared, Jamal. I cried, forcing my voice to tremble. What if you mess up the house and lose value? Grandma worked hard to pay off that property. It's completely paid off, right, Jamal? Let out a dismissive snort. Not anymore, he bragged proudly. That is the beauty of business. Leverage, Natalie. Your father and I took that deed straight to the bank this morning. We are pulling massive equity out of the property to fund my startup and cover your sister lifestyle expenses. We turn brick into capital. You could never understand that kind of financial strategy. I had everything I needed to destroy them all entirely. He had confessed to the ridiculous forgery without any hesitation. He had confessed to using that fake forgery to extract huge amounts of capital from a federally insured bank. I let out one final pathetic sigh to seal the performance. I guess you are right, Jamal, I whispered, sounding completely broken and defeated by his overwhelming intelligence. I just do not understand complex business like you do. I will leave you alone to build your magnificent tech empire. I disconnected the call, right before he could say another arrogant word. I immediately stopped the recording and securely backed up the pristine audio file directly to my highly encrypted professional legal server. I sat back in my hotel chair, staring at the surveillance screen with a slow, dangerous smile spreading widely across my face. Jamal thought he was a brilliant, unstoppable winner, writing the laws of the modern world. He had absolutely no idea. He had just officially handed a senior litigation partner a fully wrapped gift of undeniable and highly illegal federal crimes. This was exactly what I wanted all along today. I minimized the recording application on my phone and immediately opened my encrypted email portal. Me Jamal arrogant confession confirmed. They were extracting equity from the property, but I needed the full financial picture before I brought the hammer down. People do not usually commit blatant federal bank fraud unless they are backed into a terrifying financial corner. I needed to know exactly what kind of corner my father and brother-in-law were currently trapped in. I composed an urgent message to Oliver, the lead forensic accountant at my law firm. Oliver is a financial bloodhound who can trace hidden assets and shell companies across the globe in a matter of hours. I attached the audio file of Jamal confessing along with the basic details of his supposed tech startup. I gave Oliver a specific directive. I told him to dig into every single bank account, corporate filing, and tax return associated with Richard and Jamal. I needed to know why they were so incredibly desperate to steal my property this exact weekend. While I waited for Oliver and his team to follow the money trail, I turned my attention back to the live surveillance feeds running on my laptop screen. The scene unfolding inside my historic brownstone made my stomach turn with pure anger. My grandmother Clara had spent her entire life filling that home with elegance and grace, and my stepfamily was treating it like a cheap demolition site. On the parlor camera, I watched Jamal pacing back and forth with a large sledgehammer in his hands. He was actively destroying the original 19th century Wayne coating that lined the bottom half of the walls. With every swing of the hammer, he splintered the beautiful dark wood, leaving jagged holes in the historic plaster behind it. Brittany was standing a few feet away, recording the destruction on her phone. She was jumping up and down, cheering him on as he obliterated a piece of Boston architectural history. She kept shouting to her followers about how they were creating an open-concept modern vibe for her new lifestyle brand. The destruction did not stop in the parlor. I switched the feed to the main hallway and saw my stepmother Brenda dragging heavy garbage bags across the original hardwood floors. The metal zippers on the bags left deep scratching gouges in the polished wood with every step she took. She was casually throwing away my grandmother's collection of vintage silk curtains and hand-embroidered linens. My father, Richard, was directing a pair of hired handymen to rip down the custom brass chandelier that hung above the dining room table. He complained loudly about how ugly and old-fashioned the fixtures were. It took an incredible amount of willpower to remain seated in my hotel chair. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to drive back to Beacon Hill, kick the front door open, and physically remove them from my property. But I forced myself to watch the devastation silently. Every swing of Jamal hammer, every scratch on the floor, and every broken fixture was adding thousands of dollars in property damage to the civil lawsuit I was building against them. 2 hours later, my phone rang sharply. It was Oliver. He sounded breathless and agitated. "Natalie," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. "I have been doing this job for 20 years, and I have never seen a financial cluster fire quite this massive. Your brother-in-law Jamal is not a tech entrepreneur. He is a walking Ponzi scheme." Oliver proceeded to break down the grim reality of Jamal's supposed tech empire. The startup was a complete sham. Jamal had taken out massive predatory loans from unregulated private lenders to fund his lavish lifestyle and keep up appearances on social media. His company had 0 viable products, 0 actual employees, and a negative balance sheet that was bleeding cash every single day. He owed nearly $400,000 to people who were actively threatening to collect. But that was only half of the disaster. Oliver then turned to my father's financial records. Richard had always projected the image of a wealthy, successful businessman. But his accounts told a different story. To keep his new wife, Brenda, happy, Richard had been funding her bottomless shopping addictions with high-interest credit cards for the past decade. He had completely drained his retirement accounts and was currently drowning in over $200,000 of unsecured debt. They were both entirely broke and desperate. "That is why they needed the house," I said out loud to the empty hotel room. Ole confirmed my theory immediately. "Exactly, Natalie. They're totally desperate. They forged the deed to secure a massive home equity line of credit against your property. They plan to use that bank money to pay off the private lenders and clear their credit card debt before anyone realizes they are completely bankrupt." The pieces of the puzzle lock together perfectly. This was never just about a family feud or Richard asserting dominance over me. This was a calculated heist by 2 men drowning in their own financial incompetence. They saw my grandmother $2.5 million brownstone as a giant piggy bank to save them from ruin. They thought they could simply forge a single piece of paper, kick the quiet lawyer daughter out onto the street, and walk away incredibly wealthy. I thanked Oliver for his brilliant work and hung up the phone. The intense rage I felt earlier was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating calm. I looked back at the bright laptop screen. Jamal was now standing in the middle of my ruined parlor, admiring the giant holes he had just smashed into the historic walls. He looked incredibly proud of himself, believing he had successfully secured the perfect headquarters for his fake company. He had absolutely no idea that federal agents would soon be tearing his entire life apart. I read through the application details, shaking my head at their stupidity. To secure this massive line of credit, they had submitted the forged quit-claim deed as their primary proof of ownership. They literally uploaded a fake legal document to a federally insured banking institution through an online portal. They assumed the bank would push the paperwork through quickly because the property was fully paid off and appraised at nearly $3 million. They figured the bank would see the massive equity and rubber stamp the $600 in loan without digging too deeply into the recent property transfer. And unfortunately for the bank, they were right. The second document in Oliver's dossier was a wire transfer confirmation. The National Bank had already approved the preliminary draw. They had deposited the first tranche of funds directly into a brand new joint checking account that Jamal had set up just 2 days ago. I watched the live camera feed again. Jamal was standing in my ruined parlor, proudly swiping through his phone, likely looking at that exact bank balance. He thought he was a financial genius. He thought he had successfully hacked the system to save his failing startup and fund Brittany lavish influencer lifestyle. He thought he had outsmarted the quiet lawyer's sister, who just let them take her house. A cold, sharp smile spread across my face as I leaned back in my hotel chair. What Jamal and Richard completely failed to understand was the massive unbridgeable gap between local civil disputes and federal criminal offenses. If they had simply forged the quick claim deed to live in the house, they would have committed a state-level crime. Forge and filing a false instrument with the county registry are serious offenses. But in Massachusetts, a first-time offender, with a good defense lawyer, might negotiate their way down to probation or a few months in a minimum security county facility. They would claim it was a family dispute over a vague inheritance, and the local courts might show them some leniency. But they did not stop at simply occupying the property by uploading that forged deed to a national bank portal. They transmitted fraudulent documents across state lines using an electronic communication network. In the eyes of the law, that action instantly upgrades their little family theft into federal wire fraud. Furthermore, by using that fake document to intentionally deceive a federally insured financial institution into lending them $600,000, they committed federal bank fraud. These are not minor infractions that you can smooth over with a heartfelt apology and a good suit. Federal prosecutors do not care about family drama or inheritance disputes. They care about protecting the integrity of the national banking system. The federal statutes for these specific financial crimes are absolutely merciless. Bank fraud alone carries a maximum penalty of 30 years in federal prison and a fine of up to $1 million per violation. Wire fraud carries an additional 20 years. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. They took a localized family betrayal and voluntarily escalated it into a federal case that would trigger mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. My father and my brother-in-law were no longer just greedy family members trying to steal my grandmother's legacy. They were now actively participating in a major felony conspiracy against the United States government. I looked at the wire transfer confirmation document again, tracing the routing numbers with my eyes. The money was already sitting in their joint account. The crime was fully completed and entirely documented. They had left a pristine, unalterable digital footprint that any federal prosecutor would consider an absolute slam dunk. I felt a deep, thrilling sense of satisfaction washing over me. All my life, Richard had treated me like a disappointment because I chose to study law instead of marrying a wealthy businessman like Brittany did. He constantly mocked my profession, claiming I was just pushing papers while real men built empires. He allowed my stepmother, Brenda, to openly disrespect my career, and he encouraged Jamal to talk down to me at every family gathering. Now his arrogance had handed me the ultimate weapon to destroy him. I did not even need to file a civil lawsuit to get my beautiful home back. I just needed to hand this immaculate financial dossier over to the proper federal authorities and let the United States Department of Justice do all the heavy lifting for me. The stakes had officially shifted from a simple eviction notice to decades behind bars. They were going to lose absolutely everything. They would lose their freedom, their fake status, and their entire future. I closed the encrypted file on my laptop, feeling completely empowered. The trap was fully loaded. Now I just needed to make sure the federal agents had the perfect audio evidence to secure a guaranteed conviction, and I knew exactly how to get that final piece. Today, before making that crucial phone call, I needed to fully digest the rest of the financial bombshells Oliver had compiled. I opened the second encrypted folder on my laptop, which contained the deep dive into Jamal and my father's personal finances. As a lawyer, I am accustomed to reviewing corporate bankruptcies and messy divorces, but the sheer scale of financial ruin displayed on my screen was absolutely staggering. Jamal had always strutted around our family gatherings, acting like the next major tech visionary. He constantly bragged about seed funding rounds and angel investors. The reality hidden inside Oliver's forensic report was entirely different. Jamal Tech's startup did not exist in any functional capacity. There was no proprietary software, no patents, and absolutely no client roster. The business address listed on his corporate filings was just a cheap virtual mailbox in a strip mall. The financial statements showed that Jamal had completely fabricated his revenue projections to secure initial funding from a group of aggressive, unregulated private lenders. These were not standard venture capitalists. They were hard money lenders who operated in the shadows, charging predatory interest rates and demanding rapid repayment. According to the intercepted communication logs, Oliver legally acquired through a skip tracing protocol, Jamal was currently $400,000 in the red. These lenders were not politely asking for their money back. The recent emails and text messages sent to Jamal business accounts were explicit and highly threatening. They were promising to seize his personal assets and initiate aggressive collection tactics. Jamal was a desperate man, backed into a very dangerous corner. He needed massive amounts of cash immediately to save himself from total ruin. But Jamal could not pull off this grand real estate heist alone. He needed my father to provide the ultimate family cover story. I opened the next set of documents detailing Richard's financial history. For my entire life, my father had maintained the arrogant facade of a highly successful elite Boston businessman. He loved to lecture me about fiscal responsibility and the importance of building a secure legacy. The truth staring back at me from the bank records proved he was an absolute hypocrite. Richard was completely broke. His financial downfall was directly tied to my stepmother, Brenda. Over the last decade, Brenda had developed an insatiable luxury shopping addiction. The credit card statements showed hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on designer clothes, high-end vehicles, and luxury vacations just so she could maintain a fake socialite status among her wealthy friends. To fund Brenda's bottomless greed, Richard had systematically drained his entire retirement portfolio. When the liquid cash ran out, he started maxing out high-yield personal loans. The bank record showed that he was currently drowning in over $200,000 of unsecured debt. He was just weeks away from facing total bankruptcy. My father and my brother-in-law were two desperate drowning men who saw my grandmother's historic $2.5 million Beacon Hill Brownstone as their only life raft. But the most sickening part of their scheme was not just the theft. It was the malicious, calculating way they planned to leave me holding the bag. I reviewed the terms of the home equity line of credit they had just fraudulently acquired from the National Bank using that forged quitclaim deed. The mechanics of their crime were brutally clear. By forging my grandmother's signature, they transferred the property into Richard's name. They then used the house as collateral to pull out the $600,000 in pure, unadulterated cash. The wire transfer showed they planned to use $400,000 to pay off Jamal's dangerous private lenders and $200,000 to wipe out Richard and Brenda mounting credit card debt. They would completely clear their own ledgers and save their fake wealthy lifestyles. But they had absolutely no intention of ever making a single monthly payment on that massive bank loan. I sat in my quiet hotel room piecing together their endgame. Since the loan was secured by the physical property, the bank would eventually demand repayment. When Richard and Jamal inevitably defaulted on the monthly installments, the bank would initiate foreclosure proceedings to recoup their $600,000. The bank would seize the historic brownstone and auction it off to the highest bidder. My grandmother's beloved estate would be sold off to strangers, and I would be left completely homeless and permanently disinherited. At exactly 8:04 on a chilly Tuesday morning, my debit card was declined over a 4.17 gallon of milk at the Kroger on East Main Street in Carmel, Indiana. I figured the card reader was acting up. Then I called my husband, Mark, and he laughed before saying, "You're spending too much." 10 seconds later, his daughter took the phone and calmly added, "Ask permission before you spend another dollar." "Dell, I wish I could tell you," I snapped back with something clever. I didn't. I just stood there holding that gallon of milk while the cashier waited. The young woman behind the register couldn't have been older than 25. She gave me the kind of sympathetic smile people wear when they're trying not to embarrass you. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Would you like me to try it one more time?" I nodded. She inserted the card again. Beep. Declined. A man pushing a shopping cart shifted his weight behind me. Somewhere farther down the checkout lanes, a baby started crying. A little boy, in line with his mother, looked up at me and whispered, a little louder than he probably realized, "Mom, why doesn't her card work?" His mother quietly shushed him. I wanted the floor to open beneath me. Instead, I reached into my purse for my phone. Mark answered on the second ring. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something's wrong with our debit card." There was a pause. Then he chuckled. Not a nervous laugh, not confusion, a real laugh. "Maybe it's about time." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you've been spending too much lately." I honestly thought I had misheard him. "Mark, I'm buying milk." "Well," he said, "it all adds up." Before I could answer, I heard another voice. "Ashley, Dad let me." The phone shifted. Then she spoke like she was explaining something to a stubborn child. "Linda, from now on, and ask permission before you spend another dollar." Permission? I actually looked around to make sure I'd heard correctly. For a second, I couldn't even find words. Not because I was angry, because I was trying to understand how 17 years of marriage had somehow led to this moment. "I'm buying groceries," I finally managed. "We're protecting Dad," Ashley replied. "Somebody has to." The line went dead. I stared at the screen for another few seconds before lowering the phone. The cashier pretended not to notice my face. "Would you like me to put these aside?" she asked. I swallowed. "No." I opened the small hidden pocket behind my driver's license and pulled out the emergency $20 bill I'd carried for years. My father had taught me that trick when I was 16. Always keep enough cash to get yourself home. I'd never imagined I'd need it because of my own husband. "I'll just take the milk," I said quietly. I set the bananas and loaf of wheat bread aside. The total came to $4.17 plus tax. As I carried the bag to my car, the cold November wind hit my face harder than usual. I sat behind the steering wheel for almost a full minute without starting the engine. This couldn't be about money, it simply couldn't. Mark knew exactly how our finances worked. Or at least, I thought he did. When we married 17 years earlier, we'd both already lived full lives. We'd each buried a spouse, we'd each raised children. Neither of us was looking for another fairy tale. We just liked each other. Mark made me laugh. I made him feel calm. That had seemed enough. Over the years, I'd handled most of the paperwork because I'd spent 32 years as an HR director. Budgets, insurance, retirement planning, it all came naturally to me. Mark hated paperwork. He'd always say, "You handle the numbers, I'll handle fixing everything else." And for years, that's exactly what we did until he retired. Something changed after that. It wasn't overnight, more like watching a crack spread across a windshield. Slowly, quietly. At first, he only asked more questions. How much did groceries cost this month? Why are utility bills higher? Do we really need to replace that dishwasher? Nothing unreasonable. Then Ashley began visiting more often. She'd recently moved back to Indianapolis after her divorce. She insisted she only wanted to help Dad stay organized. At first, I welcomed it. She organized filing cabinets, sorted mail, even offered to pay bills online. I thought she was trying to reconnect with her father. I never imagined she was quietly changing the way he saw me. I finally started the car. Home was only 12 minutes away. Instead of turning toward our subdivision, I drove straight through the next intersection, then another. Without really deciding, I found myself heading toward downtown Carmel. Rebecca Ellis's office sat on the second floor of a brick building across from the courthouse square. I'd known Rebecca almost 15 years. She'd handled my parents' estate planning after my mother passed. She looked up the moment I stepped inside. "Linda?" I forced a smile. It didn't fool her. She closed the folder she'd been reading. "What happened?" I sat down across from her desk. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Finally, I whispered, "I think my husband just let his daughter decide what kind of wife I deserve to be." Rebecca didn't rush to fill the silence. She simply handed me a box of tissues. I didn't take one. Instead, I opened my leather portfolio and slid several folders onto her desk. Checking account statements, property records, trust documents, investment summaries. Dear Rebecca looked at the first page, then the second. Her eyebrows slowly lifted. She looked back at me. "Linda." Her voice became very quiet. "Whose money have they actually been trying to control?" I met her eyes. "I don't think Mark even knows." Rebecca turned another page, then another. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. For the first time that morning, someone wasn't looking at me with pity. She was looking at me with concern. And something else, resolve. She folded her hands together and said, "Before we do anything else, I need you to tell me exactly what happened at that grocery store." I took a slow breath. For the first time since 8F, I felt like someone was finally listening. Rebecca listened without interrupting. I told her about the 2 declined swipes, Mark's laugh, and Ashley's voice coming through the phone like she had every right in the world to discipline me. I repeated the exact sentence. "Ask permission before you spend another dollar." Rebecca took off her reading glasses and placed them on the desk. "Did Mark tell you beforehand that he was restricting your access?" "No." "Did you agree to it?" "No." "Did Ashley have your permission to manage any account in your name?" "Absolutely not." Rebecca nodded once, then opened the first folder I had brought. She had the habit of going very still when she was concentrating. Her eyes moved down the pages while one finger followed the account numbers. "This checking account is joint," she said. "Yes, household expenses." "And this savings account? Joint too. Mostly property taxes and home repairs." She turned to the next statement. "But your pension deposits here. My individual account. And the brokerage account is solely yours." "Yes, the family trust? My parents established it before they died." She reached for the property record. "And you bought the house in 1998, 8 years before I met Mark." Rebecca looked up. "How much of Mark's money went toward the original purchase?" "None." "Major renovations?" "I paid for most of them. He did some of the work himself." She nodded and continued reading. The truth was, I had always been careful about documentation. 32 years in human resources will do that to you. You learn quickly that memories get selective when money or pride enters the room. Still, seeing my life reduced to folders made my stomach hurt. The house, the pension, the trust, the brokerage account. They weren't symbols of wealth to me. They were years. Early mornings, missed lunches, caring for my parents while working full-time, sitting at a kitchen table after my first husband died, trying to calculate whether I could keep the house alone. Rebecca closed one file. "Linda, they did not freeze everything. I know that now. They may not know that." I gave a dry little laugh. "No, I don't think they do." Rebecca leaned back. "Tell me about Mark's business." That caught me off guard. "What about it?" "You said he had financial trouble before retirement." I looked toward the window. Outside, a delivery driver was unloading boxes from a white van. Ordinary life kept moving, while mine had stopped somewhere between the dairy aisle and this office. 5 years ago, 2 commercial clients didn't pay him, I said. One filed bankruptcy. The other dragged the invoice through court for almost a year. How much did he owe? Between suppliers, payroll taxes, and a line of credit, a little over $140,000. Rebecca's expression tightened. How did he resolve it? I looked down at my hands. I helped him. How much? Most of it. She waited. I used money from an investment account and refinanced a small portion against the house. We paid the IRS first, then his suppliers. I negotiated a reduced settlement on the credit line. Was that documented as a loan to him? No. Why not? Because he was my husband. The answer sounded foolish in a lawyer's office. Rebecca didn't criticize me. She just asked, "Did Ashley know?" "I don't think so. Mark didn't want anyone to know how bad things had gotten." That was the part I had protected most carefully. Mark had always been proud of his work. He could walk into a half-finished room and see what it would become. He knew framing, drywall, electrical codes, every supplier in central Indiana. Men called him when they needed advice. Then his business nearly failed. He stopped sleeping, lost 15 pounds, started checking the mailbox before I could get to it, because he didn't want me seeing another notice. One night, I found him sitting in the garage with the lights off. "I can't fix this," he said. It was the first time I had ever heard him admit that. So I fixed what I could, not because he asked, because I loved him. And afterward, we never discussed it again. At the time, I thought that was kindness. Sitting in Rebecca's office, I began to wonder whether their silence had allowed him to rewrite the story. "Retirement was hard on him," I said. "Harder than he admitted." Rebecca gestured for me to continue. "For years, everyone needed him. Employees, customers. subcontractors. Then suddenly he was home by 10 in the morning with nowhere he had to be. At first, Mark attacked retirement like a home renovation. He cleaned the garage, rebuilt the deck stairs, organized every screw and nail into labeled bins. By the third month, the projects ran out. He started watching cable news until lunchtime. He gained weight around his middle and complained about his knees. Some mornings he stayed in the same flannel shirt until dinner. I tried to include him in financial decisions. That only seemed to make things worse. If I asked whether we should move money into a higher yield account, he heard, "You don't understand this." If I reminded him about an insurance deadline, he heard, "You can't handle anything anymore." Then Ashley moved back from Louisville after her divorce. At first, she came by for Sunday dinner, then twice a week, then almost every day. She knew exactly what to say to him. "Dad, you built a company from thing. Dad, you shouldn't have to ask Linda about your own money. Dad, she acts like you're one of her employees." I heard pieces of those conversations from the kitchen. When I confronted Mark, he dismissed it. "She's worried about me. She's stirring up trouble. She's my daughter, Linda." That sentence ended every discussion. Rebecca reached for her legal pad. "How much debt does Ashley have?" "I don't know exactly. A lot. Any evidence?" "She left a credit card statement on our counter 2 months ago. I wasn't snooping, it was open." "How much?" "Just over 26,000 on that card." Rebecca wrote something down. "She has others, at least 3. And a car she can't afford." "Has Mark given her money?" "Yes, small amounts," I thought. 500 here, 1,000 there." "From where?" I felt a cold pressure behind my ribs. "The household account." Rebecca's pen stopped. "How often?" "I don't know." She turned the laptop toward herself and began listing what we needed. Complete statements, recent transfers, login changes, copies of any powers of attorney, beneficiary designations, and communication between Mark and Ashley. Then she said something that made the room feel smaller. "This may be more than a marital argument. Restricting access to shared funds, especially without notice, can be evidence of financial coercion. If Ashley is influencing transfers for her own benefit, we need to know immediately." I stared at her. "Are you saying she's stealing?" "I'm saying we don't guess, we document." That was Rebecca. Calm words, hard edges. We spent nearly 2 hours reviewing account structures. Mark and Ashley had managed to interfere with the joint household account and online access linked to it. They had not touched my pension, brokerage account, inherited trust, or the deed to the house. Rebecca allowed herself one small smile. "They've been guarding the bird feeder while you still own the whole farm." Under different circumstances, I might have laughed. Instead, I thought about the man I had found in the dark garage 5 years earlier. The man I had protected. The man who now thought I needed permission to buy milk. Rebecca drafted a list of immediate steps. Revoke Mark's authority over my individual accounts. Update my estate plan. Replace my healthcare proxy. Document every transfer, and prepare separation papers without filing them until we understood the full picture. "Nothing dramatic today," she said. "No threats, no social media, no confrontation." I wasn't planning one. I know, that's why I'm saying it. By the time I left, the sky had turned gray. I drove home slowly, rehearsing what I might say to Mark. Then I opened the front door. 3 flattened moving boxes leaned against the hallway wall. More were stacked in the guest room. Ashley stood beside them with a black marker in her hand. She smiled as if we were planning a garage sale. "We're just getting ready," she said, "in case you decide to leave." Mark was sitting in the den. He heard her. He didn't say a word. That night, I lay awake beside him while he pretended to sleep. The red numbers on the clock moved from 1:17 to 2:03, then 3:26. On the dresser sat our wedding picture from 17 years earlier. Mark was thinner then. I had fewer lines around my eyes. We looked relieved more than romantic, like 2 people who had found safe ground after separate storms. I stared at that photograph and wondered whether I was about to destroy my family over a gallon of milk. Then I remembered Ashley's voice. Not the words themselves, the certainty behind them, and I understood something I had been avoiding. The milk had only shown me the door. They had been pushing me toward it for months. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I heard the checkout scanner beep, declined. Then Ashley's voice asked
Permission?
By 6:30 Wednesday morning, I was already dressed. Mark was in the kitchen pouring cereal. He glanced up when I walked in. Morning. His voice sounded almost normal, almost. I poured myself a cup of coffee without answering. He watched me for a moment. Still upset? I looked at him. Are you? He shrugged. I think you're making this into something bigger than it is. Bigger than what? The debit card. I set my mug down. It wasn't about the card. He sighed as though I were exhausting him. Ashley and I have been talking. I nearly laughed. I know. We're just trying to make sure we're careful with money now that I'm retired. Careful. That word bothered me more than I expected. We'd spent 17 years making financial decisions together. I'd never bought designer handbags, never collected expensive jewelry. Our vacations were usually weekend trips to Brown County or Michigan. I clipped coupons, compared insurance rates every year, packed leftovers for lunch. If anyone in that marriage had been careful with money, it had been me. I looked at Mark one last time. I'm going out. He nodded without asking where. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. Rebecca's office had already prepared most of the paperwork. She'd emailed me a checklist the night before. Bring identification. Bring property records. Bring retirement statements. Don't discuss legal matters with Mark. Don't answer emotional text messages. Simple. Methodical. Exactly what I needed. By 10, we were sitting inside the Carmel branch of Heritage Community Bank with Nancy Gomez, the branch manager Rebecca had known for years. Nancy was about my age, warm smile, gray streaks through dark hair. She spoke softly enough that nobody nearby could overhear. Mrs. Harper, she said. Rebecca explained the situation generally. Before we make any changes, I need to verify every instruction directly from you. She spent nearly 45 minutes reviewing documents. Nothing dramatic happened. No alarms, no security guards, just signatures, initials, identification, more signatures. We revoked every authorization I had voluntarily granted years earlier on my individual accounts. Nancy explained everything carefully. These updates won't appear immediately. I understand. Our processing department usually finishes by tomorrow afternoon. That's fine. Rebecca nodded approvingly. Everything about this process felt surprisingly ordinary. People imagine revenge as slammed doors and dramatic speeches. Real life is paperwork. Real life is waiting. Real life is signing your name 23 times while realizing your marriage is quietly ending. Instead of driving home, I went to my sister Carol's house in Fishers. Carol opened the front door before I even knocked. She took one look at my face. Oh, honey. She wrapped both arms around me. For the first time since Tuesday morning, I cried. Not loudly, just enough to let the pressure escape. Carol didn't ask questions until we were sitting with bowls of homemade vegetable soup. After listening quietly, she shook her head. I never liked how often Ashley was over there. I thought she was rebuilding her relationship with her dad. So did I. Carol reached across the table. What are you hoping happens? I stared into my soup. I don't know. That's not true. I sighed. I guess I stopped. What? I keep hoping Mark will wake up. Carol smiled sadly. Sometimes people don't wake up until they lose something. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Mark. I stared at the screen. Rebecca had been very clear. Don't answer. The ringing stopped. Then another call, then another. Voicemail, then silence. I almost called back. My thumb hovered over the screen. Maybe he'd realized how cruel Tuesday had been. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Before I could decide, another message arrived. This one from Ashley. Dad's confused. Stop trying to scare him. I locked the phone. Confused? Mark hadn't sounded confused at Kroger. He'd sounded amused. Thursday morning felt strangely peaceful. Carol insisted we go for a walk out around Gist Reservoir. Adi. The leaves had already started turning brown. A cool breeze came off the water. For nearly an hour, neither of us talked about lawyers or banks. We talked about grandchildren, retirement, her tomatoes refusing to grow this year. Ordinary conversation. It reminded me that life was still happening outside my marriage. Around 3:30 that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca. They've processed everything. So, it's done? The revocations are complete. I thanked her. Before I could put the phone away, another call appeared. Mark. Then another. Ashley. Then another. Mark. Voicemail notification, text, another call, another voicemail. The phone vibrated so often it practically crawled across Carol's kitchen table. She looked at the screen. My goodness. I counted 14 missed calls, then 22, then 30. The number kept climbing. By 5:15 there were 41 missed calls. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Carol asked, "What happened?" Before I could answer, Rebecca called again. "This is exactly what I expected. What do you mean?" "Nobody at the bank told Mark anything confidential." "So, why?" "He tried accessing one of your investment accounts online." I stayed quiet. "He couldn't," Rebecca continued. "Then he attempted to transfer money using the home equity line you allowed him to access years ago." My stomach tightened. "He couldn't reach that either." "He called the bank?" "Several times." "And?" "They simply confirmed his authorization had changed. Nothing more. No secrets, no private information. Just a very simple fact. The access he once had no longer existed." Rebecca lowered her voice. "Linda." "Yes? There's something else." I immediately heard it in her tone, not panic, urgency. "What is it?" She took a slow breath. "One joint savings account slipped through our first review." "The emergency account?" "Yes. About $38,000. Money we'd set aside over the years for unexpected home repairs and medical expenses. It's still jointly accessible." My pulse jumped. "So, Ashley," Rebecca finished the sentence. "If she convinces Mark to empty it before we file additional protections, they legally can." The room suddenly felt much cold. Carol had been listening from across the table. She already knew from my face. "Is it bad?" I nodded slowly. Rebecca spoke one last sentence before hanging up. "I've already started preparing the paperwork." "Can we stop them?" A pause. "I honestly don't know." That evening, I watched the sun disappear behind Carol's backyard trees. 41 missed calls. None of them apologized, none asked how I was. Every voicemail began the same way. "Linda, call me. Linda, we need to talk. Linda, answer your phone." Not one said, "I'm sorry." For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't trying to save my marriage anymore. Maybe I was trying to save myself. Just as I was about to silence the phone for the night, Rebecca texted, "Be in my office at 8:30 tomorrow. We may still have one move left." I stared at the message, then at the dark screen reflecting my face. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Rebecca was already on her second cup of coffee when Carol and I walked into her office Friday morning. She didn't waste time. I filed for a temporary restraining order on the disputed savings account at 7:30. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So, they can't empty it? Not without creating a much bigger legal problem for themselves. What if they already tried? Rebecca slid a printed document across the desk. They did. I stared at it. A transaction record from the previous evening. Attempted transfer, $35,000. Status, declined. Pending restriction. I closed my eyes. Mark had actually tried. Maybe Ashley had convinced him. Maybe he'd done it willingly. At that moment, I honestly didn't know which possibility hurt more. Rebecca spoke gently. "I don't think this was about needing the money. No, it was about control." I nodded. For the first time in 3 days, I finally believed her. By lunchtime, my phone had gone strangely quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. The silence almost worried me more. Around 1, Carol looked over from her kitchen table. "Frank called." I looked up. "Frank Donovan?" She nodded. "He still does that neighborhood cookout every November." "I know. He wanted to make sure we're both coming tomorrow." I almost laughed. "The last thing I need right now is a barbecue with Mark's friends." Carol smiled. I told him everything. "You did what?" He asked why you sounded upset earlier this week. And I wasn't going to lie. I rubbed my forehead. "Carol, he already knows more than you think." Saturday afternoon arrived cold but sunny. Frank's backyard looked almost exactly as it had every November for the past 15 years. Portable heaters, folding tables, homemade chili, college football playing quietly on an outdoor television. Normally, I loved these gatherings. This year, every step toward the backyard felt heavier. People noticed me immediately. Some hugged me, others gave uncomfortable smiles. A few looked away altogether. Ashley had clearly been busy. Within minutes, I began hearing pieces of conversations. "Heard she's leaving Mark. Something about hiding money. Poor guy, just retired." I kept smiling. Not because I felt happy, because I refused to defend myself before anyone had actually asked me a question. Frank greeted me with a warm hug. I'm glad you came. So am I, although I wasn't completely sure that was true. About half an hour later, Mark arrived. Ashley climbed out of his truck first. She looked confident. Too confident. Almost like she'd rehearsed something. Mark looked exhausted. He hadn't shaved. His shoulders seemed lower than I'd ever seen them. For one brief second, our eyes met. He looked away first. We'd barely finished eating when Ashley stood beside the picnic table holding a paper plate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The entire yard slowly grew quiet. I just think families should know the truth. Frank frowned. Ashley. No, really. She turned toward me. My dad spent his whole life working. Several people nodded politely. And now she sighed dramatically. He's being abandoned because he's retired. I could actually hear Carol mutter, "Oh, Lord." Ashley continued. Linda froze him out financially. There it was. Exactly the story she'd been telling everyone. My father can't even access his own money anymore. A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Someone asked quietly, "Is that true?" I opened my mouth. Frank spoke first. Wait. He looked genuinely confused. What money? Ashley blinked. What do you mean? Frank scratched his head. I thought Linda handled almost everything. Ashley smiled tightly. Dad supported them. Frank stared at her. No. He looked around the yard. After the business almost went under. The conversation stopped. Completely. Ashley frowned. What business? Frank slowly turned toward Mark. You never told her? Mark's face lost what little color remained. Frank looked honestly surprised. I thought everybody knew. Nobody bespoke. Frank continued carefully. When Mark nearly lost his company, he looked at me apologetically. Linda kept it alive. Ashley laughed. That's ridiculous. Frank didn't react. I was there. He looked around the gathering. I helped Mark move equipment into storage while creditors were calling. People began listening much more closely. Frank pointed gently toward me. Linda negotiated with suppliers. He looked at Mark. She worked out the IRS payment plan. Another pause. She even refinanced her own house. Ashley stared at her father. Dad? Mark remained silent. Frank wasn't finished. When Mark needed knee surgery, he looked toward another neighbor. Remember? The man nodded. Insurance wouldn't cover everything. Frank smiled sadly. Linda paid that deductible too. Someone quietly whispered. I never knew. Neither had anyone else. Ashley looked completely lost. She turned toward Mark. Tell them. He didn't. Instead, he lowered his eyes. For 17 years, I'd protected his pride. I never corrected people when they assumed he'd rescued himself. I never mentioned the nights we spent balancing overdue invoices. I never told anyone I'd quietly cashed investments to save his business. Not because I wanted credit, because I loved him. Frank sighed. You know what the saddest part is? Nobody answered. He looked directly at Mark. You spent years pretending you rebuilt everything yourself. Then his voice softened. When the truth is, your wife never once made you feel smaller for needing help. The silence that followed felt endless. Ashley suddenly looked at me differently. Not with kindness, with confusion, almost panic, because the story she'd built was collapsing. She tried one last time. So, she's still abandoning him? No. The voice came from behind us. Rebecca. I hadn't even realized she'd arrived. She walked calmly across the yard holding a folder. I stopped by because Linda forgot these. She handed me the folder, then looked politely toward the group. For everyone's peace of mind, she smiled professionally. The court approved a temporary emergency hearing next week. Ashley stiffened. Rebecca continued. Not about dividing property. She looked directly at Mark. Only to determine whether financial authority was improperly exercised. Mark slowly closed his eyes. For the first time, he looked ashamed, not embarrassed, ashamed. Ashley reached for his arm. Dad. He quietly stepped away from her. Just one step, but everyone noticed, including me. As people slowly drifted back toward their conversations, Mark finally walked over. He stopped 6 feet away, close enough to speak, too far to touch. He looked older than he had just 1 week earlier. I didn't think his voice cracked. I know. No. He shook his head. I really didn't. I waited, maybe for an apology, maybe for an explanation. Instead, he whispered. Ashley said he couldn't finish. For the first time, I realized something heartbreaking. My husband hadn't just believed lies. He'd needed them to be true. Because believing them allowed him to stop feeling guilty about everything I'd sacrificed for him. Rebecca quietly touched my elbow. We should go, I nodded. As we walked toward the parking area, Rebecca leaned close. Tuesday isn't the final hearing. I know. But it may become the day your husband finally hears the truth. I looked back once. Mark was standing alone beside Frank's old maple tree. Ashley was talking. He wasn't listening anymore. For the first time in months, he was completely alone with his own conscience. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday morning. 6 days, that was all. Not 6 months, not 6 years. Just 6 days that somehow felt longer than our entire marriage. Rebecca warned me not to expect a dramatic courtroom scene. This isn't a divorce trial, she reminded me as we walked through security at the Marion County Superior Court in Indianapolis. It's a temporary hearing, I know. The judge isn't deciding who gets what, I know. Today is about one question. What question? She looked at me. Whether someone crossed a legal line. That sounded simple enough. It wasn't. Courtrooms are much quieter than television makes them seem. No dramatic music, no shouting lawyers. Mostly people waiting, papers shuffling, doors opening and closing, the occasional cough. When our case was called, Mark was already seated at the opposite table. Ashley sat beside him. She looked tired, not frightened, just exhausted. For the first time since this all began, she avoided looking directly at me. Mark looked older than I'd ever seen him. His navy blazer hung loosely across his shoulders. He'd lost weight. Or maybe guilt simply makes people appear smaller. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Judge Ellen Brooks looked to be in her late 60s, calm, confident, the kind of woman who had probably heard every family story imaginable. She greeted both attorneys politely. Then the hearing began. Rebecca spoke first. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't attack Mark. She simply built a timeline. Your Honor, Mrs. Harper voluntarily granted her husband access to certain financial accounts over many years for convenience. She placed several exhibits before the court clerk. These authorizations were based upon trust. She paused. Not ownership. Judge Brooks nodded slightly. Rebecca continued. Without notifying Mrs. Harper, access to the household account was altered. She presented printed bank records. Mrs. Harper's debit card was declined while purchasing groceries. She handed another document forward. Following that incident, Mr. Harper and his adult daughter informed Mrs. Harper she would need permission before spending money. Rebecca pressed a button on her tablet. The courtroom speaker quietly played a saved voicemail, Mark's voice. Linda, call me. Then another, Ashley's. Stop making this harder than it has to be. Rebecca didn't linger on them. Instead, she displayed screenshots of text messages. One of them read, ask permission before you spend another $1. The courtroom became very still. Mark's attorney stood. He wasn't aggressive. In fact, he seemed uncomfortable. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding between spouses regarding budgeting after retirement. Judge Brooks nodded politely. Go on. My client recently retired. Household expenses became a concern. Rebecca didn't interrupt. Neither did I. The attorney continued. There was never any intent to deprive Mrs. Harper of financial security. Judge Brooks looked towards Mark. Mr. Harper, he stood. Yes, Your Honor. I have a few questions. Of course. She glanced down at her notes. When your business experienced severe financial difficulty 5 years ago, Mark swallowed. Sighs. Did your wife assist you financially? A long pause. Yes. Were those funds gifts? Yes. Did she require your permission before helping you? No. Judge Brooks turned another page. When your tax obligations became overdue, Mark stared at the witness stand. Did your wife negotiate payment arrangements? Yes. Did she ask for repayment? Another pause. Judge Brooks folded her hands. Mr. Harper, her voice remained calm. Did your wife ever require your permission before paying your business debts, protecting your credit, or preserving your home? The silence lasted several seconds, long enough for everyone in the courtroom to feel it. Mark tried speaking. Nothing came out. Finally, no. Judge Brooks nodded once. Thank you. Ashley suddenly leaned toward her father's attorney. He whispered something back. She looked frustrated. Then she raised her hand slightly. Your Honor. The judge stopped her immediately. Miss Harper. Ashley froze. You are not a party to this action. Yes, ma'am. You will remain silent unless directly questioned. Ashley slowly sat back. For the first time, she looked nervous. Rebecca called Nancy Gomez from the bank. Nancy testified by video. She explained exactly what had happened. Mrs. Harper personally requested the revocation of previously granted authorizations. The bank verified her identity. Standard procedures were followed. No confidential information had been disclosed to Mr. Harper. Judge Brooks asked one question. Did the bank freeze Mr. Harper's personal accounts? No, Your Honor. Did Mrs. Harper take funds belonging solely to Mr. Harper? No, so the only changes involved accounts legally owned by Mrs. Harper or authorizations she voluntarily chose to revoke. Correct, simple, clear, impossible to misunderstand. Then Rebecca introduced one final